Sanjay, Kunal, can we have you up on stage, please? One of the biggest questions in the minds of those who are here at the India Today Conclave is the kind of recovery in the economy, in trade, in commerce that we'll see on the back of this pandemic. And on the speed and the quality of the economic recovery hinges our collective well-being. So joining us in this last session of the India Today Conclave, I have half the panel with us right now. The other half is on the way, so bear with me as we bring this together. I want to introduce, first and foremost, one of our top investment bankers, especially given the number of private equity, venture capital deals that are going through. We're now in a zone where we seem to be throwing up one unicorn a day, if that continues, and for how long, and also the view on the government's monetization programs. We hope to talk about all of that and more with Sanjay Nayar, Chairman of KKR India. Welcome. Thank you, Sanjay, for coming to the India Today Conclave. With us also for a sense of how the e-commerce companies and the whole startup ecosystem is viewing some of the government's policies and what's required to speed up growth in the post-pandemic period. We have Kunal Bahl, CEO of Snapdeal. So welcome, and we'll get started, and then Piyush Goyal will join us when he will. So Sanjay, let's get started by asking you about the big privatization push of the Modi Sarkar. It's been spoken of for 7+ years now. Finally, we saw some visible concrete signs with the Air India privatization going through. Are you hoping that this is an inflection point of sorts? From here on, the whole privatization push gets a real thrust. Is that what you're hoping for?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Rahul, and good evening, everyone. I think it is absolutely the inflection point, and more importantly, ideologically, there's a massive shift, which is great. And not to worry about what the opposing sounds are. I think this is a decisive shift. The second big thing about this is the way it has been done. It's a lock, stock, and barrel deal, right? So that makes a big difference when you exit completely. And that's a very important thing, because all of the designs of keeping 40%, 30%, keeping this, keeping that doesn't work. So it's a very good model, the way it's been executed, the way it's been run, and the way it's been structured. And I think this is an absolute imperative. We've got to start to monetize some of the public sector companies that do not either make strategic sense or are big dissavers for the nation. It's very, very critical. And we talk of more things, I'm sure. How do you get sustainable growth? You do need resources, and this is one way to get resources. One is to get resources, other is to cut down the negative savings. So I think it's a great move, well structured, and if this is the kind of model they're going to follow, they'll have a lot more success, I think, from here on.
It's also a politically contentious move, and we've already seen opposition from different political parties, which is only to be expected. Give me a sense of how you think the government should be navigating these privatization waters to be able to ensure that at the end of the next fiscal and building up over the next several months, we're able to see many more deals go through, like the one that we saw with Air India.
Well, I'm not from the government, so I don't know how they'll do it, but I would say you need a couple of things for this. One is you need serious bidders. I think you need the right structure, like we spoke about. I think you also need participation in the general asset monetization plan from local institutions, insurance companies, pension funds, banks. So when you have local capital and foreign capital, as well as private capital from within India, that's how the model succeeds. So I would say, Rahul, that this can be a sustainable model, but you do need local participation from serious people, less controversial, very clean counterparties. And I think, like in all of the countries, privatization can be a big success. And as distinct from asset monetization, which maybe we can talk next, but for privatization, you've got to make sure that there is absolutely no legacy left where people can criticize in the future. So I think this government has done a good job in being extremely cautious on that.
Kunal, you're seeing the rate at which we are throwing up unicorns. It's almost as if you wake up every single day, and Sanjay is smiling because he's a part of the story, and some of it is not just going to other coffers, but staying back home. But is this something that you believe, this phenomena, do you believe is sustainable? And also, how many of these newfound unicorn status companies do you see be able to sustain and run businesses in a continuing fashion over the years to come?
So, great to be here, Rahul, and thanks for having me, and good evening to everyone. You know, I think there's too much focus on valuations and unicorns and relatively less focus on the problems that they are solving. One of the interesting things that we all know is that India has tons of challenges, tons of problems. And what each one of these companies, and not just them, but the many hundreds and thousands of other startups are doing, is actually solving fairly structural problems, but incredibly elegantly and efficiently using technology and very innovative methods. Now, the question that is often asked is, all these companies are losing money, so why are they worth so much? When investors look at these companies, and Mr. Nayar here can guide further, they look at what the future potential of these businesses are. What are the moats that they've created? What is the infrastructure that they've created that can over a period of time create lasting, enduring businesses? Because fundamentally, the problem they are solving is a problem worth solving, and it's a very large one. And I would go as far as to say that most of these companies will be very much around, and most of these companies could be worth a lot more than what they're worth today, while that may sound shocking to many. But, up till a few years ago, it seemed shocking that there would be even one company worth $1 billion in India. So we've come a long way as a startup ecosystem, and you only have to look in the rear-view mirror and see the distance we've covered to just believe in what will happen next.
Sanjay, are we seeing a real shift of money, venture capital from a market like China, which is now clamping down on its tech behemoths, to India? And is that part of the reason why we're throwing up so many unicorns? Is it just the size of our population and the fact that we're digitizing at the speed at which we are, that is only inevitable that this be a sustainable business?
No, I think this is purely for the reasons of India. The size, the demographics, the demand, and hopefully, again, future sustainable growth, bigger discretionary spending, changing buying behavior, adoption of e-commerce, all of those things. So it's happening on its own, and I think great entrepreneurs coming up, like Kunal sitting here, and as he said rightly, interesting moats. You do fulfill a consumer demand, a consumer need. You're feeding into consumer behavior. A lot of money will come into this. And the other reason the money is coming in is that I think there is a fairly high degree of comfort that now in this area, government interference is not there, and they can really do business in a very predictable way. And I think you ought to give credit to the government. They have really encouraged the sector. They have obviously done a lot of digitization. You've seen pretty good formalization of taxation rules. So all these things do matter to create an environment, not just because it's just the size of the market. It's a much predictable market. So I think that's the other reason why there is a lot more
You're talking
dollars.
about predictability of policy. If you're an American e-commerce company at this moment, predictability of policy is not something that you'll be talking about. Kunal, is this in some senses unfair to global corporations investing in the India story, given that at various times the government seems to have these pangs of desi nationalism and protecting the commercial interests of our homegrown companies?
I'm just a mere startup founder, so I think the questions around policy are way above my pay grade, and I'll leave the policy making to the policy makers, and we'll just follow the policies when they come out.
That's a deft way of ducking it, very diplomatically. Reminds me of Dr. Jaishankar, who was here yesterday. I want to welcome TV Narendran, Global Managing Director of Tata Steel. He was with Minister Goyal, so it's not his fault. So I must just say this, that he would have been here bang on time, but he was with the minister at the event where they were. Also at this moment, President CII, so welcome. I hope you had a a good interaction, and we're very happy that you could join us here at the conclave. So welcome, Narendran. Let me put the next question to you, in fact, now that we have you on stage, which is to do with the feedback that you're picking up from all the companies that you speak to about the quality of economic recovery that we're seeing. We're heading into the festive season. We're in the middle of the festive season, coming on the back of the pandemic. What is it that you're picking up from all the India-ing companies that you're speaking to about how fast we are recovering and the quality of this recovery?
Yeah. So we just had the CII National Council a few days back and spoke to a number of CEOs. I think the feedback is that overall things are positive. The feedback from the CEOs are they expecting growth at 8.5 to 9.5%. CII's own position is 9.5% growth. There are issues related to rising input costs, issues related to containers, availability of containers, etc. Private sector investment is picking up, but not as much as everyone would have expected. But generally, the survey told us that people are expecting better numbers than 2 years back, both in terms of revenues and profitability. Some sectors, like the high contact sectors, the hospitality, tourism, they're still struggling a bit. But I think they're expecting that the second half of the year should be better. So overall, it's a positive narrative which is coming through. Some concerns on input costs, some concerns on inflation. MSME sector struggling a bit, and the services sector a bit more. Yeah.
And not that you're involved with the Air India purchase directly, but the fact that Air India is coming back to the house of Tatas is something which, how do you, as one of the top faces of the Tata groups at this moment, look at this big news that's just been put out?
I think it's been a matter of great pride for everyone within the group, outside the group. I think the feedback we've got from multiple people has been one of great pride and joy, and looking forward to keep the Air India flag flying high. Yeah.
And there are many people sitting here wondering what are they smoking and what is it that they, is this an emotional call in some senses, that this is something that you just wanted for various issues of legacy, history, to get done, and then dekhi jaoge, we'll figure out how to make it happen, but right now let's go out and get it?
You know, like you said, I'm not directly involved in that acquisition, but I think as a group, we've grown up hearing a lot of stories about how JRD used to run Air India, and I think it was an example of pursuit of excellence. And if we had a world-class airline, one of the global best many years back, why not now?
Also, one of the big thrusts of the government is asset monetization. And it's central to the government's plans of financing a lot of what it wants to get done. Why don't you give us your thoughts as the minister comes in on the manner in which this is being approached at the moment and the kind of outcomes you believe are likely?
You know, I think it's a very good step because it helps you monetize or unlock value from assets without having to lose the ownership of assets. So I think it's a great way of driving more efficiency into the system, and for private sector, great opportunities to unlock value from assets which have already been created. So private sector welcomes it. I think it's a great idea, and the way the government is driving it.
Come. Can we welcome to the India Today Conclave our special guest at the last session of the India Today Conclave is the Minister for Commerce and Industry, Consumer Affairs, Food and Public Distribution and Textiles. You know, I had to write it down so that I don't forget some of his portfolios. And if it takes so long to just read out the portfolios, imagine having to get all of that done. Are you finding it difficult to cope with all the portfolios and so much responsibility on your shoulders in terms of packing the day in and getting things done? Minister Goyal, welcome to the conclave.
No, as long as I'm able to do my job all right, and end of the day reach your program before you wind up, I think everything is getting sorted and getting done. But I think it's a great opportunity that Honorable Prime Minister has given, and I'm grateful to him because he's kind of brought together areas which have a lot of synergy. For example, BIS is in consumer affairs. There was always this clamor that industry and Bureau of Indian Standards need to work together. We have textile, which is the largest job creator in the country. There was this need that industry, and we look at free trade agreements worldwide, get more market access for textiles. So there's a lot of synergy that he's tried to bring together.
So at this session at the India Today Conclave, we're going to spend some time talking about the quality of economic recovery, and the government's plans to speed up the economic growth process from here. And we have Minister Piyush Goyal, we also have TV Narendran, Global Managing Director of Tata Steel, President CII, we have Kunal Bahl, Chief Executive of Snapdeal, and Sanjay Nayar of KKR India. So, Minister Goyal, a big announcement yesterday by the government on Air India, the privatization finally going through. Are you hoping that this will, in some senses, be an inflection point for a lot of what the government was talking about for several years, which you now, on the back of the pandemic, hope you will finally be able to get done?
Yeah, in my previous engagement, where Mr. Narendran was also there, I complimented the Tatas for, in my humble view, as if I don my old hat as an investment banker, an absolutely wonderful buy. To my mind, the Maharaja is in safe hands, and now time for India to regain its glory in international aviation circles. And this was a move which, if I remember correctly, Arunji will recall. Mr. Arun Jaitley had made a remark which I read in the paper again today. He used to often say that if we don't disinvest Air India at that time, there'll be nothing left to disinvest. And in some sense, it came true. The government spending thousands of crores every year just to keep an airline going. And that's our taxpayer money, which could go for public welfare, which would go to create new infrastructure, which could go to promote industry. So I think Prime Minister Modi has truly demonstrated his ability to take strong decisions in the interest of India, for the good of the people of India, and has demonstrated to the world that he seriously means business when he says the government has no reason to be in business.
One of the challenges which was being spoken of is the lack of private consumption at this moment. And despite the fact that we're coming out of the pandemic, there would have been an expectation that there'd be a release of pent-up demand, which in some sectors there has been, but net, the macro picture seems to be that private consumption hasn't taken off yet. How is the government hoping to deal with that issue and try and encourage people to go out and consume?
All the statistics somehow don't seem to suggest what you are saying. The numbers of, after all, GST collection is a reflection of people spending. And the net collection in a GST regime, which is at the last stage of consumption, clearly only reflects consumption coming back into the market. The fact that industry, by and large, is almost running to capacity in all the main sectors. The PMI is high, the mood of the industry is very positive. Exports, I don't know if you are aware, we have touched $197 billion of export in the first 6 months. This was unheard of in India. It's the highest ever we've done in the first 6 months. And normally we all know that the first 6 months are slow. In addition to that, 3 of those months were the second wave of COVID. Toughest possible time. And we've done 197 billion, which in some sense is reflective of India's credibility worldwide. The fact that the world is now looking to India as a trusted partner. The world is wanting to engage more with India. And I can tell you, my own meetings or discussions with various world leaders from trade and economy suggest that they are very, very keen to expand our relations between India and other countries. We've launched FTA negotiations with UAE on the 22nd of September, with Australia on the 30th of September. Both are going on full stream ahead. With the UK, I was to possibly have a meeting on I will be meeting my counterpart there who's just come in a day after tomorrow. And then by November, we are hoping to launch FTA negotiations. EU, we launched a couple of months back. We are looking at a possible FTA with a couple of more countries.
Do you have any commitments to timelines about when you hope to get some of these free trade agreements actually signed, sealed, and started?
UAE, almost certain will happen in the next 3 or 4 months, a full FTA. With Australia, we'll have an early harvest, an interim agreement with the contours of the larger agreement in place. Again, by January, they have actually set a deadline of 25th December. And both teams are working to that deadline. And I just got a message from the Australian minister that I'm looking forward to meet you and discuss further on our negotiations day after tomorrow. Tomorrow we are meeting, Tomorrow we are meeting. So the mood is to really fast track it. UK in November, once we launch, we plan to look for an interim agreement by March and do a final agreement by June or July. Canada was very keen to start discussions, but COVID hit first them, then us, then them, and the roller coaster went on. Then they got into election mode. That's just got over. Again, I got a message day before yesterday from the Canadian counterpart that she's looking forward to meet me day after tomorrow. So, and then I think we'll launch it very soon. Now that the elections are over, there's certainty over there, so we have time. And Canada, we have to just finalize whether it will be a full FTA or an interim early harvest agreement to get benefit of the low-hanging fruits. Why I'm sharing all this with you is that now we have to prepare Indian industry. We have to get ready, and that was what our earlier engagement was all about. I was talking to some 60 industry associations, ASCON it is called. CII has this body called ASCON. 60 sector-specific industry associations. Capital goods manufacturing, renewable energy, product manufacturing, machinery manufacturing, power, electrical goods manufacturing, cement manufacturing, steel, automobiles, auto components, every sector was there. And I can see the mood in Indian industry, particularly with a series of steps to help ease of doing business, to promote industrial manufacturing through the production-linked incentive scheme, the fact that we are trying to reduce compliance burden, 22,000 already done, many more in the annual, decriminalize several laws. I'm working now on legal metrology department, which is actually sounds simple, but people are facing a lot of problem from them, the weights and measures and stuff like that. So there's a lot that is happening. Prime Minister on Wednesday will be unveiling India's infrastructure plans going forward. And now we are not planning infrastructure in any haphazard manner anymore. Last few years, you must have noticed, every infrastructure project has to stand on its own legs, has to be viable, has to have an economic impact on industry or agriculture, whichever sector. There has to be a significant value add when we go into any particular infrastructure project. So a lot of work is happening, scientifically driven, technologically supported, to make Indian industry both competitive, quality conscious, working to scale, and becoming world-class.
So when the RCEP agreement was being discussed, Mr. Narendran, there were concerns about the impact it will have on Indian industry, which is one of the reasons why the Modi government held back. What's the sense at this moment about these country-specific free trade agreements that Minister Goyal is pushing for? Is this something that India Inc. will welcome and think that it benefits from? Or in the style of the old Bombay Club, you think that even now, with these free trade agreements, Indian industry would have to take a knock?
You know, Rahul, it's a slightly nuanced subject, and I think the industry position is, yes, it's important to be part of global value chains. But having said that, when you negotiate FTAs, we really need to make sure we do the right thing, because ultimately, when you look at it, there's movement of people where there are a lot of restrictions. Migration is not free. Then there's movement of investments and there's movement of goods. So you need to balance all three, right? Because in India, you need to create jobs. So you need investments to come in. PLI schemes and things like that help investments come in. India is unique because it's a large domestic market as well. So you can invest in India to make in India for India. You don't necessarily have to invest in India only to export. But having said that, you need exports because it does help you when, let's say, the domestic market slows down, or it helps you build scale beyond the domestic market. So finding that balance between these three is, I think, very important. And I think on investment, we are one of the most open markets. I mean, pretty much in every industry you can get in with 100% FDI. So I think we should encourage investments in India so that you address jobs in India. At the same time, help industry build scale. Industry can be competitive within what's in control. What's outside industry's control, we need to work with government, like logistics, infrastructure, effective tax rates, so on and so forth. So I think it's a nuanced subject. There's no one-size-fits-all. Different countries will have different approaches to deal with this, and I think India should find its own unique approach, and I think the government is trying to find that balance. And
Sanjay, you were traveling for a month in Europe, trying to raise funds for companies to come largely invest in India. What are you picking up with all the calls that you're having globally with different kinds of pension funds, hedge funds wanting to invest in the India story? How bullish, according to you, is the world on India and what the government is doing over here?
I think after this COVID phase 2, I think there's a lot of positivity around the reputation. That's number one. I think that's very, very critical because they think it's a safe place to do business. All this was pretty unfounded earlier that we heard. Secondly, I think what they're most impressed with, if you want to bring in long-term capital, and that's the guys we talk to, the formalization of the economy in the last 5 to 6 years has been tremendous, whether it's formalization of the taxing systems, the whole digitization of the economy, just the institutionalized governance. I mean, you just heard Minister Goyal mention about every project has to stand on its own feet. I mean, these are things that are music to the ears of long-term investors. So I think that's a huge positive. Second thing, I think, is the spending that's happening on infrastructure and the asset monetization plan that the government has announced is going to bring in billions of dollars, okay? The one request they have is that when they come in for infra participation, they would love to see Indian money come in alongside. So the life
Put your own skin in the game.
I think it's just fair because, the past experiences of 15, 20 years have not been great. And I think it makes sense for us to be more self-reliant, to unleash your own insurance and pension capital as well, where the government is actually tweaking a lot to make sure it's available. Get that available, and I believe you put $1 from there, $10 will come in from outside. But there is a huge cachet of capital which is hoping to come in. I'm not that focused on venture and new companies, but just the old traditional economy. The next big flood, I think, will be in the infrastructure segment. So the asset monetization plan, I think, is a very encouraging one. It's just got to be structured right. The way Air India was sold, well structured, out of the way, here's the asset, take it. Similarly, good AMP will really attract a lot of capital. But I think the imperative is you've got to get Indian money alongside, even if it's 1/10. And it can be done, by the way. I mean, the fiscal deficit is in control. You let the local savings come in and just don't depend upon only foreign money.
You spoke about the predictability of policy, and there's been minister furor in something that you've been handling, which is to do with e-commerce rules. And we've seen from the American Congress to American representatives a pushback against the lack of predictability and this sense that while on the one side you want global money in, but the government also has this nationalistic impulse of wanting to protect its core vote base and the voters who've typically and traditionally voted for the Bharatiya Janata Party. To what extent are you reacting to the global criticism of some of these e-commerce rules, and how do you address this concern about predictability of policy? That this is what the rules were when I came in, and that's what I hope they'll stay as we go along.
Just by the way, this is one government which has not done a single retrospective amendment in its 7.5 years in office. Not a single one. And I dare say I'd like anybody to reflect and tell me if we have done a single action which has a retrospective impact. On the contrary, we have right-sized what wrongs were done by the previous government. Point one. Point two, there is absolutely no retraction of any policy whatsoever when it comes to e-commerce rules, which are for consumer protection, under consideration and deliberation, or the FDI policy. We are reiterating what has been said many times over, that there has to be fair play, there has to be equity. Just like Mr. Narendran just said about when we do FTAs, we have to have a reciprocal arrangement and fair play. It's not about political vote banks. I'd like to correct you, Rahul. It's about livelihoods. And we have to ensure that we have an organized business environment in which everybody has equal opportunity. And that's the effort that is being sought to be done. The good part about this government is that everything we do is after a lot of consultation. Look at the new education policy. 5 years in the making. 2015 it came out. We had 200,000 issues on which feedback was received. Stakeholders from about 650 odd districts across the country gave feedback. All were responded to. Just like every other policy by and large that we make goes through extensive stakeholder consultation. And then we come up with, as they say, Amrit mein se, Manthan mein se Amrit nikalta hai. So in that sense, consultation is good for the system. everybody's viewpoints come in, and then a robust decision can be taken. But I can assure you and all the stakeholders, there's no retrospective amendment. Everything is as it is, a reiteration of what it was always expected to be.
You were in the news recently, and I thought it would be a good opportunity for you to explain what you were actually wanting to say when you quoted some headlines essentially making the point that when you make a rule, companies find a way of following that rule in law but violating it in spirit. And then there was some back and forth. So can you just try and explain what is it that you were trying to push for, and to what extent do you think the concern is being addressed, and what more you'd like to see companies do?
No, it's nothing. It's a very simple thing. We all understand it. After all, in COVID, there's a protocol, how many people are allowed in the room. And I think you've maintained that protocol here, right? That's the letter and spirit of the law. But if you say the law says 200 people in the room, and therefore what I can do is I'll make a break or a wall over here and have another 200 people sit over there, that's not what the spirit of the law was. It's as simple as that.
Kunal, given the speed at which the startup ecosystem is growing, what more would you like to see the government do? What policy levers would you like to see them press over the next several months, so that not just do we continue throwing up unicorns, we also throw up sustainable businesses?
Sure. So, India's startup ecosystem is now the third largest in the world after the US and China. In the first 6 months, we had $12 billion of investment come in the startup ecosystem just this year. Now, often a lot is said about, there's a lot of criticism of the government for many things. But I want to talk about, for a minute, about all the things the government has done for the startup ecosystem over the last many years. Because I started my company 14 years ago at a time when people didn't even know what a startup was. Right? It was as though you didn't get a job, that's why you're doing a startup. To present day, when it's a matter of pride that someone in our family is doing a startup. Right? So our country has gone through a transformation in the last 5-7 years. Now, if you look at the number of things the government has done over the last 5-7 years, starting with the Startup India policy in early 2016, because of which hundreds of incubators, accelerators were set up. We have 30 plus states and union territories that have a startup policy now, right? We have 57,000 startups that are actually recognized by DPIIT, right? We actually have, I don't know many of you know, but there's a National Startup Advisory Council that the minister chairs. We meet once a quarter where the minister spends hours and we go through many, many issues. Like name one country, I don't know any, where the commerce minister of the country spends hours every quarter taking feedback and then acting on it. I've seen him in action. He acts on it real time in the meeting. This is very inspiring for anyone wanting to start a company or running a startup in our country. Now, when a 22-year-old, you can clap, but now when a 22-year-old girl in a small town or a big city of India goes to her parents and says, I want to do a startup, it's no longer evoking a shocking reaction from the parents. It's evoking a reaction of, happiness, pride, some nervousness, but one of hope in general. There is this feeling that now we can build a company, we can do something from scratch, even if we didn't come from money, even if we didn't have any resources. And that is the most reassuring thing in our country right now. We all know there are lots of problems in our country, right? All of us know that. There is no question about it. But when a founder, when an entrepreneur looks at a problem, they look at it as a challenge. They look at it as an opportunity. They look at it with a positive mindset, right? That this is something we can actually solve. And it's that can-do mindset, can-overcome mindset, can-create mindset of India today that is actually driving the growth in the startup ecosystem. And obviously all of that is bringing in capital, which is accelerating the ecosystem.
It must give you great pride to see the headlines day after day in the pink papers announcing which companies just turned into a unicorn. To what extent do you think the government deserves credit because of its startup stand-up policy? And to what extent do you believe this is just the spirit of India and young people like Kunal and many others who are following in his wake, who are making the effort, despite all odds, to go out and follow their dream.
Rahul, why are you trying to divide us? The industry, government, media, the people of India, we are all working as joint stakeholders. It's a collective and collaborative effort. And I think nobody is taking away the credit from anybody at all. It clearly is the hard work, the technological prowess, the mind, the thinking of new innovative ideas that our young boys and girls have demonstrated that deserves the highest accolades. In the midst of COVID, we've seen 30 plus unicorns in the midst of COVID, 21 in the last 6 months alone. So I think these boys and girls, youngsters, have all done real wonders for India, and all of us should actually give them a standing ovation. That's what the Startup India movement deserves.
One of the global headwinds that we're seeing when it comes to China is the clampdown on tech companies. To what extent do you think the government's been able to benefit from what Xi Jinping is doing internally, and what more can you do to ensure that companies, manufacturing, investment moves away from China at a greater speed towards our shores?
See, we don't craft our policy because something is happening in another country. Our policies stand on their own legs. Our policies are crafted or designed to meet India's needs and what is important for India to become a trusted partner in the rest of the world. And that's what we drive strength from. I mean, I'm happy to share with you, why is the world looking at India for greater engagement today? In the midst of COVID, at the peak of COVID when it started last year, we are amongst the only country which met every single international commitment. Bear in mind, ladies and gentlemen, every single international commitment that our goods or services sector had made internationally, unless the buyer was not willing to take the delivery. Our services sectors, travel was down, tourism was down, hospitality was down. Despite that, last year we were at 97% of the previous year's level on services. That means the IT sector actually grew. Our goods were at 94 odd percent of previous year. This year I've already given you the figure. The mood is, and as I can see it, the mood in the country today is that goods and services are competing with each other in a friendly manner to reach the 1 trillion mark each. So goods this year will be about 400 trillion export. Services maybe about 180, 190. Could take a shot at $200 billion of export. But they are both competing because services are growing manifold, and with work from home, opportunities for our young boys and girls are going to increase by leaps and bounds. Work from home really makes India the most competitive place to source your services from. And now I don't even have to struggle on mode 4, which is what we do in FTAs to try and get more people to relocate to those countries. Now it's important to get market access and get people in India opportunity to serve world markets. So to my mind, there's huge potential, irrespective of what's happening in other countries, on our own strength, with the world looking up to India as a trusted partner, a reliable partner, somebody who has transparent, rule-based, democratic way of working, a country with a decisive leadership, with such wonderful skills and talent in our youngsters, the right demographic dividend. Everything is right for us. We need to, all of us collectively, determine that we are going to become Atmanirbhar. Atmanirbhar Bharat is at the core of our philosophy now, to become not only self-reliant, but a self-confident India, wanting to engage with the rest of the world on equal terms, with full spirit and confidence, reciprocity and fairness. And I think India's time has come.
Mr. Narendran, is there a dichotomy, and to what extent do you believe there is between the stock markets, the value that's being created at the top of the income pyramid, and the numbers that come out about unemployment, especially at the bottom of the pyramid? We're seeing, for example, in the technology sector, a huge spike in salaries, demand for jobs, but it's not evenly distributed. What are your suggestions to government and to the minister about what should be done to try and make it, to the extent possible, equitable when it comes to job creation?
Yeah. So, obviously the last 2 years has been very different, and the services sector has struggled a lot, and a lot of people have been impacted by that. But if you look at the data, even over the last 6 months, rural employment has actually gone up. Apart from the Manrega scheme, in fact, the non-farm rural employment has gone up. And a lot of it is to do with the focus on infrastructure and the road building which is going on. So I think the focus on infrastructure is a great way to have more equitable growth, because infrastructure is built across the country. Infrastructure creates jobs for semi-skilled people. Infrastructure also helps people migrate from a agri-based job to a more industry-based job, which requires a bit more skill. So I think it's a good bridge, and the focus on infrastructure helps that. Secondly, the connectivity, whether it's the digital connectivity or the physical connectivity through infrastructure, I think makes it more inclusive. Even if you look at the stock market, the number of retail investors in India are growing. And today there's a lot of, excitement. If you look at the younger demographic, almost everyone is investing in shares and mutual funds.
Which isn't necessarily a very good thing, because the level at which some of these kids are entering the market, and given how little money they have, which is being invested, hard-earned money, and the fact that Sanjay Nayar is laughing, saying, I'm taken care of, but about the others, I'm not so sure. But it is genuinely a problem that obviously the retail equity participation base is going up, but that brings with it its own set of challenges.
It does, but it shows that today a lot of people sitting at home, who have, and it's not big money, it's small money who, they're investing in, and there are millions of new shareholders being added every year. Tata Steel has 1 million shareholders, just to give you a sense. So that's great, because it's not just limited to a few people in Bombay who are making the money. There are investors across the country.
As a former investment banker, your thoughts on the manner in which, and I was seeing the story done by our data intelligence unit, cities like Dibrugarh, cities like Jamshedpur throwing up a disproportionate share of the new investors. So at one level, it warms my heart that you've got so many more younger millennials coming in. At the other level, it scares me, because they're coming in at very inflated levels, and their understanding of risk, their understanding of market dynamics, and the ability to actually book some profits and get out before they burn their cash.
Well, finally, Rahul has become an economist, on the one hand and on the other hand. And I think this will be a dichotomy that each individual will have to sort out for himself and herself. I do hope everybody makes conscious investment decisions carefully, takes the best of advice. I hope the mutual funds and all are a better, which I believe are a better way to enter a market which is in such turbulent times. And therefore, I do wish channels like yours, and now with your Business Today initiative, you will try and educate our investors to exercise due caution and ensure that they're well educated, well informed about the decisions they're taking.
Thank you for the free plug, much appreciated. That was very useful. So I want to thank Minister Piyush Goyal for coming to the India Today Conclave and for sharing his insights. We've been through a very rough 2 years. A lot of the plans that all corporates had, individuals had, government had were not just waylaid, put on the back burner, but just couldn't be pushed. And we're coming out, and I think this is our first in-person event in a very long time. And I don't know how many people would say this, but it's one of the first times I've been in a gathering as big as this in quite some time. So hopefully over the next several months, some of the things that you've been talking about will actually take off on this growth runway, and we look forward to tracking that. And I want to thank you very much for joining us at the India Today Conclave. Thanks, Sanjay Nayar, Kunal, and TV Narendran as well. Minister Piyush Goyal, thank you so much. Can we have a warm round of applause, please? Thank you.